Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Donna Will. I'm Professional Development Coordinator for Central Region and wanted to welcome you for another Employment First webinar. And today's topic is on the importance of transition services and supports. And we have several speakers today, Christy Stewart, Matt Elburn, and Alexandra Jones, and as well as Stacy Jones, our statewide career and development services director, I think. Yeah. So before we begin, we have a panel on the right. For those of you who can't hear well, you may be logged in on computer audio. So if you go into the audio box, you can switch at any time during the webinar from phone call to computer audio or computer audio to phone call just by clicking the button, and then hopefully your sound quality will improve. And if you want to send a chat, you can use the question box to do that, like if you're having issues, or if you have questions, you can use that. So we also have handouts today. They're in the webinar platform in the handout section. We can also email them to you if for some reason you can't download them. The webinar is going to be recorded today, and normally I send out a link in the follow-up email, so for everyone that's registered, so you can review the webinar at any time. So that's all the housekeeping stuff. So I'd like to introduce Stacy Jones. Good morning, Stacy.
Good morning, Donna. Thank you so
Hi.
much for that lovely introduction.
Okay.
She keeps us all straight here. I can assure you all, you have no idea. So hopefully everybody can see this quote on the screen. I saw this yesterday and it actually made me laugh out loud because I could relate to this. I imagine many people on this webinar can also relate and feel like there's just too many tabs open. And I know, along with other headquarters and DDA regional office staff, we've had the opportunity to speak to many of you frequently, just out and about, and I know how many wonderful initiatives everybody has going on just around so many different things. So I want to just say a quick thank you, and definitely in particular to the 6 organizations that are receiving technical assistance through our ODEP employment Employment First State Leadership Mentor Program. So next week we have 2 ODEP subject matter experts coming into Maryland to meet on site with those 6 providers. So we're really excited about that. And also a shout out to the 20 providers that applied and were accepted to take part in ODEP's Organizational Transformation Webinar Series 2.0, which started yesterday. Each of those webinars in that series is focused on a different aspect of organizational transformation, and this year's series goes a bit more in depth than last year's more beginner level series. So as that progresses, we will absolutely be interested in connecting with some providers that are participating just to hear your impressions and what you're finding most helpful about this particular series. So again, I recognize that many of you, probably everybody, have a lot of balls in the air, no matter what your role is, or a lot of tabs open, as it may be, both literally and figuratively. And I hope that this webinar gives you an opportunity to just close down a few of those tabs for a moment, just listen, and enjoy our wonderful co-presenters that we'll get to in just a few minutes. So we are here to talk about and focus on the concept of transition. And obviously the word can mean many things. So really quickly, I'm just going to put it in context for a bit today. In a more generic sense or general sense, it's just the process of changing from one state or condition to another. So I can transition from the parking lot to the restaurant. I can move from pre-K to first grade. I can transition from working in the morning to exercising in the afternoon. I can go from one job to another. I can move from one house to another. I can go from one state to another. And all of these things, large and small, happen countless times throughout our lives. Sometimes we don't think twice about it and we don't need any support. Other times these transitions are really big and we do need a lot of support, or different types of support, or support from different people. So specifically, today when we talk about transition, we're really going to be talking about the transition for students with disabilities from school to adult life. And why do we think it's important to focus on this? Well, it's no surprise to anyone listening. Historically, students and adults with disabilities have had more limited options, and limited options in whether we're talking about actual options in education, options in community life, employment, experiences, relationships, community membership. The list can go on. And as we know, similarly, students and adults with disabilities have had generally lower expectations placed on them early in life by people around them. And we know that this absolutely impacts outcomes later in life. So this is true for anybody, not just students with disabilities. But for a student with a disability, for many years, historically, again, options consisted of more traditional facility-based day model as something to transition into, as opposed to having opportunities to explore work, to see work as an option, to help create a vision that included full community membership. So hopefully this visual isn't new to anyone either, but in case it is, it's a visual representation of the trajectory of a person's life. We call it the trajectory toward a good life. So you can see the cloud that says vision for a good life. And it obviously it spans from birth to the end of life, and it allows us to be looking toward what we vision. You know, this is my vision for my life, what I want. And so if we think about transition as something that we're thinking and planning for, you know, way back, starting at birth, and using that vision to get us where we want to go. And equally as important, I would say, it keeps us away from what we don't want for our lives, so we can avoid those if possible. So again, this tool and these concepts are not disability specific, obviously, and we can use them for any of our lives, and it helps us remember this wonderful trajectory. So before I introduce our first presenter, I wanted to do 2 quick poll questions so we have a better idea of our audience. So Donna's going to bring up the first poll. We just want to know, do you support a youth with a disability in some capacity? It could be professionally, personally, formally, or informally, doesn't matter. In just a second, you'll see it. So looks like most people are saying yes. Give you guys a few more seconds to answer. I had a feeling that that would be the case because there's youth all around us. Okay, so it's most people say yes, that you in some way support a youth with a disability. So now we're going to go to the second poll question, which is, what is your role in supporting youth with disabilities? And the choices that we're going to provide are going to be, are you family or friend of a student with a disability? Are you a coordinator of community services? Do you represent a provider organization? Are you involved in education or other? And if you're in the other category and you'd like to share what your role is, you could certainly throw that in the chat box. That would be great too. So it looks like mostly family, provider organization, and other. Okay, terrific. So looks like 53% provider organization, 21% family friends, 8% CCSs, 8% education, and 10% other. So that's great. And that just helps to, again, to know who is on our webinar here. So enough background. I'm so thrilled to introduce our first presenter, and probably someone that needs very little introduction because she is doing so much work around Maryland and has been really a great partner with DDA and our other state agency partners, and that is Dr. Christy Stewart. Currently, Dr. Stewart is the section chief for secondary transition at the Maryland State Department of Education, Division of Special Education Early Intervention Services, and that is really hard to say, so I give her credit because she does it really well. In this role, she provides support and technical assistance to all local school systems in Maryland in the area of student transition planning and transition service delivery. This position also supports any statewide initiatives that leads to the continuous improvement of services. She is the project lead for a statewide core leadership group through the National TA Center on Transition, which she will talk a little bit about today. Dr. Stewart has over 25 years experience in the fields of special education, school to work transition, and employment and training of people with disabilities, especially those with significant support needs. She has several journal publications, various web-based training materials focused on integrated employment, self-advocacy, and inclusion. And she is just generally a really terrific lady. So DDA is thrilled that she's agreed to join us. So Christy, I am going to turn things over to you.
Oh, thank you, Stacy. My gosh, I always get embarrassed when the bios are read because it's like on and on and on. But you know, at the end of the day, I just love what I do, and I've only done this. This has been my first career. It's what I believe in, and it's always a privilege. And along the way, you know, the hope is that you're going to make some differences with professionals or with families or with, most important, young people. But the bonus is that we get to meet and work alongside some terrific partners. So thank you, Stacy. So in getting started, I'm spending a little time with you this morning, and you know, for some of you, I was looking at the webinar attendee, you know, breakdown, and some of you are in education and may certainly know a little bit about the transition process, and some of you may think you know and you need a refresher. So I'm going to kind of give a little overview, and then I'm going to speak a little bit about a few things that are pretty interesting happening right now in the landscape of secondary transition within the education realm. So I always start with this slide. We call it the big picture. So forgive me if you've seen this before, but I always start with this because I feel like it's a bit of my mantra. You know, there's so much legalese and policies that and requirements that we have to do by the law, but you know, the bottom line is we do the work up front in order for our young people to be best equipped to have that meaningful life and that full community rich life. So we always say that your first day of adulthood should be no different than your last day of high school. So if we've done our job right, that just means that all the supports and services that we've had along the way, that we've tweaked and realized this is how this young person learns best, works best, that should hopefully be in place when they walk across the stage and move into the next aspect of their life. And then we can say that we've achieved that seamless transition. So I like to kind of start with that. You can go to the next slide, Stace. So secondary transition and special education. We, you know, this is a chart that I use quite frequently because, you know, we try to break things down based on, obviously, when we think about this critical stage. And here in Maryland, we begin at 14 through 21, but we know the power of secondary transition practices are really in place to narrow those gaps that we know exist to meet those outcomes. So ultimately, we are working along the way to kind of level the playing field as best we can, but ultimately we want outcomes. Well, we want outcomes for all of us. Everybody wants the outcome if you put in the work. So here in Maryland, in our division of special education early intervention services, we have been operating off of a strategic plan. And the strategic plan has 3 action imperatives, and secondary transition is one of them, which is pretty groundbreaking in my world, because transition has often been obviously part of the IEP process and part of the transition planning, but it's been something that has been spearheaded oftentimes by a select group of people within a school system. So the idea that our leader, Marcella Frankowski, has said, we need to pay attention to this. This is 1/3 of our work. These are our students 14 to 21. It's pretty remarkable. So let's think of secondary transition and its importance. So we have to acknowledge, though, at the core of secondary transition, it's grounded in federal legislation. So the law says, so our big disability law for education is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And what's interesting about that is that it's called the Entitlement law. So that word's important because it means that students, young people, birth through age 21 here in Maryland are guaranteed to be provided a free, appropriate public education. So we always kind of couch that it's a right. I mean, education is a right that should be provided to everyone, and that's what makes our country so fabulous. So for individuals with disabilities who traditionally were not receiving that, this law protects them. So we call it the IDEA, which is up there on the box to your left on the screen. But what's interesting is that the federal law says that at age 16, every person that has an IEP must begin annual transition planning through the IEP process. So the IEP is our teeth. It's our legal document that equates to students being diagnosed with a disability and entitled to receive services. So in Maryland, if you look at the right side of the chart, our COMAR, which is our Maryland state regulations, there's also the power of transition in education, which is why in Maryland they said we should really start earlier than 16. So Maryland law requires that no later than 14, which oftentimes can be middle school, every person with an IEP must begin annual transition planning. So we're kind of saying, not only are we saying it's important, we're saying it's so important that we think we should start earlier. So it's the responsibility of the local school systems to provide these services. So there's the notion that and one little added little thing about Maryland that's very unique, that doesn't happen everywhere, is that aside from starting earlier, the term birth through age 21, that's important because through age 21 means that when a student turns 21, if they turn 21 in, say, October, they would continue to receive special education services and transition planning through that school year. And that's a big deal, especially with families are thinking about their planning for after school ends. And many states kind of end it when they turn 21. And that is something a little bit unique about Maryland. So equally important to the law is this effective transition planning that we keep talking about. And there is this notion of this cross-system, cross-agency collaboration that needs to happen as they're exiting school. So if you look toward the bottom part of the chart, you see the two IDEA and COMAR coming together, and it says secondary transition. So that's the period of time that we are providing services. And I'll talk a little bit later about what those services may be. And then moving into post-school outcomes. But keeping in mind that this federal mandate requires states to provide this when students exit school, the federal mandate goes away. Other mandates take its place, but the entitlement of that free, appropriate public education goes away. And I think if there's one thing that those that are in education can agree with me, is that notion of entitlement versus eligibility is the hardest thing to make sure folks know about, make sure they're prepared for, because we don't want families and young people to be proceeding through this entitlement phase of their life and then to all of a sudden realize that everything's going away and there's nothing in place. And that's not what we want to see happen. So we want to prepare for the eligibility world. So again, for families and for students itself, this is an incredible learning curve. It's navigating a new system. And in many ways, it's beyond DDA, it's many different systems. Our job is to really make sure that folks know the differences and what are the requirements of those systems, but it's quite daunting. And we hear a lot from families and advocates about the disconnect sometimes between education and adult services. And, as Stacy and I mentioned earlier, this collaboration we have kind of goes beyond just DDA and schools. We have lots of other partners, and our aim is to make that better. We know that there's a disconnect, and we're trying to communicate a little better so that we are not presenting ourselves in silos. So we emphasize the need for common messaging, mutual understanding amongst the agencies and the school systems. So this is great, having an opportunity to talk to a lot of providers on this call. So again, mutually beneficial for adult systems and LEAs and local school systems to collaborate. So having the ability for adult service systems to anticipate who is transitioning into their systems, it really allows them to engage with students and families prior to exit. That's difficult because you're kind of throwing in funding and who's paying for what. But the best practice part, think about how powerful that would be in that last year or 2 years of schooling under entitlement, to be able to almost have some conversations with the providers or with the agencies that will be providing services and supports. And I like to view it almost like these are two systems running next to each other, you know, in a meet. And eventually one of the runners proceeds forward. It's almost like passing that baton so that you're not doing it so abruptly. And that's why we use the term seamless transition. You know, we're ensuring that the services and supports that were in place and that were successful during school are in place as they enter adult services. So finally, then the other piece, thank you, Stacy. So that to me kind of talks more about the legal piece. This is what we have to do, and these are the things we want to do. So if I thought to myself, what is the perfect transition process? Because, you know, transition's been around a long time, and people have been thinking about what are those characteristics beyond the law, beyond the requirements. And I like to think of it as the goal is to assist students as they progress through school and move into that adult world. So that sequential delivery of service components. So I view it like a flow of services almost, early in high school, maybe late in middle school, beginning those services and beginning those components that we know are yielding good results. That's one piece. The second one is what we've been talking about today, those transition partners, whether it's partnering with other school systems, partnering with your community, and that could be employers, it could be institutions of higher education, it could be independent living centers, it could be some of our providers, it could be also other families and other networking opportunities. That to me is looking at who's got what and how do we work together. And then that result is that uninterrupted collaborative transition from school, whether they're going into work, whether they're going into post-secondary education, whether they're going into their community. That to me is the perfect process. And I literally keep these little bullets on my near my desk to kind of constantly remind myself of that. Next slide. So the Transition IEP. So these are things that there are 2 pages in our online IEP that are requirements based on that IDEA that I mentioned, and also echoed in Kelmar. So there's a few things, and there's a few things that I want to just bring to your attention. Number one is the measurable post-secondary goal. The idea is that we want to be thinking way back at age 14, maybe even earlier, about where do you see your young person or that student, where do you see them as they're exiting school? So it's a post-secondary, it's after they've left. It's got to be measurable. We want to make sure that they have the necessary steps to achieve that. And what is it based on? It's building blocks. It's based on assessments. We have to know where students are, and you know, age appropriate. Are they focused on transition on some of those activities and some of those environments, whether it's the workplace, the community, in a college setting, in a classroom setting, in the home setting? Those assessments should be frequent. They should be ongoing, because again, even like us, we have over the years changed our minds, gone in different directions. You need to continually assess that. The third piece is actually the action steps. We call those transition services, but we also think of them as activities. So those are the things that at 14, 15, 16, and so on, every year you will identify services that will get to your goal. So if your goal is to work in a restaurant, you know, working in the kitchen alongside a chef, those activities along the way will be to, you know, do some career exploration around what it takes to get a job in a restaurant. Maybe it's doing some job shadowing in a restaurant. Maybe it's getting a paid work experience or an internship along the way. We also have a course of study for students that are thinking about this area that they're going to be focusing on. Thinking of education in general, for general education, we have courses of study where you're kind of focusing all the courses to get to that, achieving that goal. This is no different. We have goals that we collect progress on an annual basis to make sure you're getting toward that post-secondary goal. And we also have a requirement for students to be, we call it the student invitation, and that's fine, but it's more about the student involvement. And that involvement is a continuum. We have lots of students that really aren't comfortable attending meetings or talking in front of people about themselves, but maybe they could do some pre-work and get involved in that way. and also the outside agency invitation. So different pieces, different parts in that timeline of 14 to 21, it's going to be really crucial to have the agencies that will be anticipated with services to be part of the conversation. The next slide. So best practices. So, this graphic kind of depicts, it kind of narrows down everything that I was just talking about. And we think of planning and programming for transition. They're all gauged to those three outcomes on the right part of your slide. We always say to ourselves, it's, how are we interacting in our community in independent living? How secure are we and confident are we to be navigating the world after we leave school? But also we think of education and further training. We think of employment. And those are those big buckets of outcomes that we are moving toward. And there's obviously other outcomes, whether it comes to rec and leisure and social. But as far as education goes, this is what our focus is on. And we do think of it like, how do we implement these best practices? So we think of the puzzle piece self. So self goes into what I was talking about with assessment. So, we have formal tools, we have informal tools, we assess along the way. But really, we want to look at, like, what are the strengths, what are the needs, what are those goals that they have inside that they want to work on? And then more importantly, what don't we know about this young person? Because that's the beauty of special ed. It's not cookie cutter. It's not a puzzle piece that fits actually exactly like this. Everybody's a little different, and it really takes that assessment piece to really understand who that person is so that we can support them. You can go to the next slide, and then next slide, sorry. And then there's opportunity. It's really important to explore what's out there. Do your research. And again, you've got time. You've got some time. You have potentially 7 years of programming to really try to hone in on figuring out, what's going to be that match, what's that interest level for that young person, and then find out what's expected of them. What are the supports you're going to need? And again, those minds can change. They may change their mind of what they want to do. So it's important to kind of do the legwork. And that's what the opportunity piece is about. And the next slide is preparation. So we were thinking of in academics, modifying curricula in some cases, looking at core graduation requirements for young people that want to get that standard high school diploma. What is it going to take to get that? And remember, that diploma may be a crucial part of that post-secondary goal. For some of those career choices, it may be that you need that added lift of a standard diploma. But then also community and work experiences. We know the importance. We know what the research says. It's the #1 predictor, everyone, of a paid work experience when you are in school, is the #1 predictor of a positive, successful post-school life. And again, those extracurricular activities that kind of hone in as well on getting yourself ready. So here are a couple, this next slide just highlights a couple of, oh, I forgot about this one. Stacy and I talked about this yesterday. This is we're calling this the Maryland's Transition Continuum. This was about 3 years in the making labor of love. And I see that it's kind of looking wonky with some of the lettering. So we'll get that fixed for you guys. But the idea is that this will be a great thing to make a copy of and put in your office or put on your refrigerator, because we like to think of transition as really thinking back to what Stacy talked about with the trajectory of a good life. We've been, myself, I've gone through a process through when I was in kindergarten all the way through where I'm working on different things to get to my outcome. And there are things that are just good practices for all kids. We call that's the first column up top, the first row. What happens in birth through elementary school, some of the things. Now for kids with disabilities, we oftentimes need to accentuate some of those things. But again, it's that awareness of self, awareness of what's happening in the community, and then developing those. And then in middle school, you start to hone in a little bit. Formal transition planning begins, but you're talking about preparing for that career, looking at career exploration. High school, it gets a little bit more detailed. We're thinking of, basing on those interests, you're kind of honing in again. Maybe it's those career preparation academics that all kids go through, whether it's career and technology education or those electives or work experiences, no different for our guys. But again, there's a few tweaks for our students with disabilities that we know they need. And one of the big things is the need for adult services. So that happens in that column as well. And then again, the desired post-school outcomes really are no different for students with and without disabilities. So we like to use this to kind of talk about a continuum of how we view transition. So if you go to that next slide. And again, this one's wonky too, and I don't know why, so I apologize. But the idea is that everything and all the initiatives and all the added things that we have that are added value to the requirements of transition are things that we are focusing on to improve outcomes. So outcomes is the center circle, and all the things that we do around the circle should be going toward those outcomes. And I'm going to spotlight a couple of these. We know that there's lots of really good research out there that tells us really what to do and where we should be focusing our efforts. So that's the good news. The bad news is that sometimes it takes doing things one thing at a time, because there's oftentimes a lot of things to focus on. So the bolded second square, the strategic collaboration, I wanted to spotlight that just a little bit. To talk a little bit about a unique partnership that we have here in Maryland that is engaging all state level agencies and other entities that, as I like to say, that anybody that kind of touches transitioning youth. And we can go to the next slide, sorry. So NTACT is our National TA Center on Transition. They are our go-to place, all things transition. If folks don't know about NTACT, I can certainly share their website. It's filled with lots of great information for lots of different stakeholders in transition. But their purpose is really to assist folks like myself, state agencies, VR agencies, other disability agencies, to look at promising practice and the best practices. So the stuff that works, making sure that we are ensuring that students are graduating prepared for life after school. Period. So they go a step further. And next slide, they put out a request for additional technical assistance. And it was a non-funded, it was no money exchanged, but what we got out of that, we applied as a state to become an intensive TA state. And we were awarded, I believe it was January of 2016, one of those states. And what we got out of that are content experts and nationally recognized folks that have been working with other states. And it's pretty remarkable because, as Stacy mentioned, we're all incredibly busy, schools and agencies and providers, and we sometimes have the philosophy in place that we want to make changes, but we don't know how to do it because nobody can step up. We're swamped. So we've got now this core leadership team meeting in place that is led by some of the folks at NTACT to help us. So our purpose is to improve our state level coordination of transition to increase outcomes for our students. Because we hear loud and clear that oftentimes our state agencies aren't talking to each other. It makes it very confusing for those transitioning out, for families and other people supporting young people. And we knew that we needed to get that squared away first before we could work on our local level implementation. So our outcomes that we chose were to refine a flow of services document. I mean, how fabulous would it be to have one thing that tells families and young people and agencies, this is how you kind of navigate in and out of the agencies, whether it comes to eligibility. And a lot of our agencies you're going in and out of them. So we are updating this work through this leadership team, and then we're working on a technical assistance plan to improve those programs. And we're getting very close to having a draft document that we will be piloting in the near future with several school systems. Of course, the school systems that are on the phone don't know who they are yet because we haven't identified them, but we'll be gaining some interest from folks to find out who is interested in that. Next slide.
And Christy, just before we move on,
Yep.
we had a question. Can you repeat one more time what NTACT stands for? So
I'm sorry. Yes, I can. I wasn't looking at my chat feature. Okay. NTACT is the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. And actually, you know what, Stacy, maybe we can put in the message that goes out to everybody the website.
Absolutely. Yep.
transitionta.org. Maybe put that in there so folks have that.
Definitely. Thank you.
Sure. So, one of the things that within this NTAC group that we're part of is that we get to customize, how we do business. They come in with expertise. They've worked with all these different states, but every state's a little bit different and what they want to focus on. So we had a few things that were really important to us, because I think traditionally, since I took this position, and I know Stacy's been here for a year and a half, 2 now, Stacy, almost.
Just 1 year. It might seem like 2, but just 1.
Okay, so we've got these partners that are at the table that are very interested in working together, but we know that there were things that were really important to us to get right as we move forward, and this was the thing. So we wanted to make sure this holistic approach was in place. We really wanted to benefit all students with disabilities. We have a large number of students with disabilities in Maryland that are everything from students with emotional disabilities all the way to students with the most significant disabilities. So that's a big net of students with a variety of needs, which means it's a variety of services and supports that are needed. So we knew that we wanted to extend to everyone, but we also know we needed a plan to get there, which is that strategic plan that I mentioned earlier. And then the third piece is that cross-agency, cross-division collaboration and coordination. We needed to be presenting together, doing professional development together, building capacity within each other's agencies, and then sharing our resources. And we're coming up with some pretty cool things that will have some common messaging that will be shared with a lot of our schools and our agencies and our providers and our families, so that they know that we're talking to each other. And that really is our intent.
Christy, just one more request to specify the acronyms DSE and EIS.
Oh, DSE-EIS is the Division of Special Education and Early Intervention Services. And in an earlier slide, I think we had spelled it out and then I had it, but I didn't do that. So that's my fault.
Nope,
so
no problem.
It is the division under the Maryland State Department of Education. Thank you for keeping me straight, Stacy. So if we go back to this original slide, the next thing I just wanted to briefly highlight was the last square to the right of the outcome circle, which was innovative tools. And one of the things that we hear all the time in our transition, in the school transition world, is you have compliance versus quality. And compliance is, these are the things that we have to do because the law says it. And then there's quality, and we see a lot of people that go the extra mile, school systems that are doing incredible things, and to be honest, there's no mandate for you to do that. And as far as my leadership, my goal is to provide as many cool, innovative tools that are naturally going to get you to that quality, that are going to support you along the way, because we know that we want to go beyond what we're expected to do and go beyond what we know is best practice. So one of those, if you go to the next slide, and some of you have heard about this, we have, this is another labor of love. This is about 3 years in the making, but we are currently in implementation mode of a new Maryland Transition Digital Portfolio tool. And this actually is a homepage of, and this is a mock student that we call Sam. But this is what the homepage looks for a student's portfolio. But there's a couple things I want to highlight on this portfolio that I think will be of interest to folks on the call. What makes portfolios have been around a long time. I think even when I was in college, we had a portfolio when I was in education to be a teacher. And oftentimes, art portfolios, you do artwork, you put them in a portfolio and you show your work. But a lot of those are paper-based. This is a digital portfolio. So again, it's online. What makes the digital aspect of this even more unique is that oftentimes digital portfolios are led by staff, professionals, whether it's a teacher, whether it's an adult provider. They're the ones kind of leading this through, they're kind of teaching this to the young person. What makes this unique? This is one thing that is owned by the student. Once they leave that school system, we begin this at age 14 for those interested school systems. Again, not mandated, but once they leave the school system, this portfolio goes with them. So how incredible is it when they are working with a provider or working with all these systems where you're having those intake meetings? How great would it be to have a bit of a repository and some documentation of all the things they've done along the way, whether it's around work experiences or some of their writing samples if they're applying to college, or some of their independent living tasks that would be included in that life section. So that's what makes this unique. We are working on creating, various add-ons. We're going to continually be, developing on this, but we piloted this with several school systems, and we piloted it with across ages. So we piloted it with students exiting schools at 21. We piloted this with students entering transition at 14. And, the feedback has been pretty remarkable. Anything new, it has, kind of one of those growing pains. But the idea is that, I always like to use this as an example. In special education, a student is determined eligible for special education based on things they can't do, for lack of a better word, their deficits. And we decided that it was really important for us to architect a tool for young people as they're transitioning out to be a strengths-based tool. It really was important because nobody presents themselves and presents themselves in a way that highlights everything that they can't do or everything that they don't do well. And it's so crucial when kids are leaving school is to be able to present themselves in the best light. And this does that. This is all the things that they can showcase. So there's a lot of details around that. You can go to the next slide.
Christy, before we move forward, we just had a question from a provider organization about if somebody chooses their services as an adult service provider, how could a provider potentially access information that's in the digital portfolio?
Right. That's a great question. And, and we're learning a lot through our pilot because we have students that have kind of transitioned out. And one of the things that we are working on is in that last year is with the students and the family's permission, because again, this is something owned by the student, is what is the information that is included in a student's portfolio that would be beneficial as a provider is working with a student or is getting to know the family and the student. And that is something that we are looking closely at because that's the intent. The intent is if you are going for a intake meeting with DOORS, our VR agency, it's great to be able to pull up some of the information that would allow the VR agency to look at the qualifications and the requirements to make them eligible. So there's going to be more to come on this, and we will also be doing some further trainings getting into this with providers in the future. We just wanted this to be rolled out with schools right now, but the idea is that you can make any aspect of the portfolio public. Right now, it's kind of it's under lock and key in the sense a student doesn't have. It's not like the thing is out there that's on the website and everyone and their grandmother can see it. They can pick and choose the areas of the portfolio that they want to show. And certainly some of that comes with the transition planning of saying, hey, when you're meeting with a provider, you should be showing them these aspects. Because again, we want to architect this so it's really student driven, but students clearly, like any student, needs to be trained how to do that. So we're bringing in providers and families and other stakeholders to make sure that the process works for everyone. One thing also is that the tasks and the things that are included in the portfolio were vetted by several focus groups that included advocacy organizations and families and providers. So we really were very purposeful with architecting this in a certain way, so it was student-friendly, family-friendly, even with its language and how we approach things. So you will be, as a provider, you will be hearing about some coming up trainings or at least some show and tell, so to speak, about the portfolio. So you can be on the lookout when students are coming in. You can say, do you have a portfolio? Because we really wanted this to be, we can't mandate it because it's brand new, but we already have about 10 school systems that have indicated that they want to start the process of implementing this in their system. So that's pretty encouraging. So anyway, and I want to wrap up now, but we talk about the fact that we begin at 14. We encourage students to reflect on what they've learned along the way. And what I love about this is that students have a place to really see where they've grown. You know, I always think about when students first go out and do like their first work experience and where they are and then where they end up. How great to be able to kind of see that sequence and be able to showcase that. I think that's pretty powerful. So next slide. Lastly, we talk about those buckets of outcomes. So we kind of market this, and this is a student, the picture to the right is one of our pilot students from Carroll County. And this young man in particular was exiting school, and he led his exit meeting at his IEP, and this was him leading this. If you had a larger picture, you would see that the table was filled with a doors counselor, there was some school folks there, his family was there, and there was a screen, and he was talking through some of the things that he had been learning and some of the things he wanted to do when he exited school, and he was showing some of the things from his portfolio. Pretty darn powerful, because it really was about him, which is what it should be. So it's a showcase to, it's a vehicle to showcase your employability skills. For those wanting to go off to college, you could, you know, have all your necessary documentation to apply for college. And then also there's the part on there about really prioritizing the things you need to work on to be independent, whether it's living on your own, travel training, understanding your finances. It's a one-stop shop. So really excited about this. As I said, it's still brand new. If you have additional questions specifically about the digital portfolio, we have an implementation site that is public that gives some really good little explainer videos about what's in it for a student, what's in it for a family, what's in it for the schools, what's in it for adult world. I can get that link out to you right now. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I will get that out to you, to Stacy, to get out to everybody. Okay, well, I thank you guys so much for your time. I feel like I talked really fast and it was a lot of information, but please don't hesitate to contact me. I think you have my email, and any questions or suggestions or things that you've heard about that are cutting edge, we're always welcome to hearing them. So thank you guys so much. And I know Stacy's going to go introduce our next panelist, but
well, you're not getting off so quickly because we do have a few questions.
Oh no! Oh, I have no answers. Oh.
I mean, obviously, people are very excited about the portfolio. That seems to be where most of the questions are coming from. It's such an incredible tool, and it makes so much sense, really. Let's see. This person says, wow, cool platform, much more technologically advanced than an IEP and transition planning when I was a kid. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. By what tool will students, family be able to access this portfolio? Will it be web-based by any search engine, or will it be acceptable only by school system online?
That's a great question, and I didn't address that, but what's kind of interesting about this is that, as I said, this goes with them when they leave. So oftentimes, those of you who have, students, especially in high school, usually, I guess even more than high school, they're getting their own email address at a school system. So say you have an email address that is affiliated with, say, Worcester County Public Schools. Clearly, when you leave Worcester County Public Schools, that's no longer in effect. So there is a login page that gets access to, and that is usually through an email. And what we have been working with school systems about is if students don't have like a Gmail account, for example, we suggest that. But if they are in school, they can use the school email to access their portfolio. And then in those transitioning years toward the end, that will be part of the transition of then choosing a new email that would be something you carry on. But the beauty of this tool is that it can be accessed at a school library, on your phone, on an iPad, on a tablet, on a computer. It is a link. Ultimately, every student, what becomes their portfolio is a link. And that link could be shared, and you can share pieces of that. You could share the link and only show, say, for a disability support office at a college, you may only want to show them 2 or 3 documents, but you could share the link and just have those things be visible. Or if you were meeting with a provider and you wanted to talk a little bit more about some of those independent living skills, you could share that link with them and open up those things that you wanted to share. So we architected it so it was flexible and it could be used anywhere. We have had issues in schools with, I'm not technologically savvy, but things like the firewalls, and there's like these black lists and red lists and all this stuff. And it's just normal kind of precautionary safeguards in schools. And that's why we have a digital portfolio team that works with school systems to kind of work with their technology counterpart. And the same thing will happen as they're exiting school, that if folks are having difficulties, we can architect, it's like the back of the portfolio, you can architect it so it doesn't have those issues. But schools are especially tough because there's a lot of safeguards in schools because, you know, they don't want students, you know, getting into any kind of unsafe situations. But that's the beauty of this. That's why I'm even more excited, is because it's very user friendly, because we hear all the time, not everyone has a computer or not everyone has a phone, and that you could go into a public library and pull it up. So that's
great.
pretty cool.
Thank you. And there's a couple questions sort of asking about which school systems are using them and time frames. But if I'm understanding correctly, it's really up to the student whether they want to use it or not. It's not, may not necessarily that everyone would have one. Is that correct?
Well, it's student owned. It's student owned and locally developed. That's kind of how we market it. When they're young, obviously they're in school. So what we're doing is we're asking school systems, are you interested in starting this process of implementing the portfolio, even if it's with one middle school and one high school. And the idea is that you're offering it up. Now, a student and their family can say, nope, I'm not interested. But a school system kind of gets the ball going. They get it started. But it becomes the student's tool. So a teacher is not going to have access to every single portfolio and all that's in there, but they could request a certain piece of it. But the idea is that we are starting with the schools, and we targeted, I think we have a pretty wide range of school systems right now that are interested. Everyone from Maryland School for the Blind has thrown their hat in the ring. I think Carroll County, I know some of our Eastern Shore counties. We can certainly, you know, get that information out to folks. But some of them are very interested, but they feel like they don't have the infrastructure right now, and they're a little nervous about it. The beautiful thing is this is ready to go, and it's not going anywhere. So if you are working in a particular area and want a little bit more detail about that, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to kind of put you in touch. A lot of folks, for example, Carroll County has a really strong transition council, and one of their new committees on their council is the digital portfolio. So the providers that are part of that council, you know, get kind of updates frequently through the idea of the council. So
that's great. That's great. Thank you,
Okay.
Christy. This was really informative. Thank you. And hopefully
Wonderful.
you'll stick around to answer any additional questions.
Sure, of course. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So now we're going to switch gears and we're going to jump right in to introduce our next two presenters. So joining us is Matt Elburn, and he is the transition coordinator with Worcester County Public Schools. And Matt is also part of our NTACT planning team that Christy talked about a little bit earlier. Joining Matt is Alexandra Jones, and she is an employment specialist with the Worcester County Developmental Center in the Eastern Shore region. Alexandra has also been providing some leadership in the employment community of practice for job developers in that region. And I also know that Alexandra is just generally passionate about what she does. So Matt and Alexandra are going to be talking a little bit about some of the collaborations and partnerships that they are involved in and that support transitioning youth in their area. So thank you, both of you, for joining us, and I'm going to turn things right over to you guys.
Good morning. This is Matt.
Good morning. This is Alexandra.
We just wanted to start out I had written down a lot of notes from what Christy was saying. In Maryland, I've seen we're a very progressive state in the area of transition. And as Christy said, transition is one of the 3 imperatives in all of special education at the state level. So that gives us a lot of focus, and it's starting to come with a lot of resources. So we're pretty supported in Maryland in each of the counties. We've also got a lot of research projects going on, and like Stacy just talked about, the NTEC, developing the flow of services that Christy talked about, is going to be a great tool for agencies, for families, for students, and also for teachers and case managers at the local level who aren't as aware of when applications are, you should look into applications for DOORS or DDA or other agencies. So that's an exciting tool that we're developing right now. What's also great about Maryland is the organization, the Division of Career, DCDT. It's a part of the Council for Exceptional Children. So it's the division based all around transition. It's a national organization. And one of the great things since Christy's been on is the representation of all the LEAs in Maryland, local educational agencies, the counties, at these the annual conference. I think we had 15 of the 24 that went. So Maryland is well represented at this conference every year, and it's a great experience. And then we also have all the transition coordinators and some teachers from each of the LEAs that meet quarterly for our transition work group. And a lot of ideas are shared there, and Christy brings in different agencies. I know Jill from DOORS and Stacy was there this past month. So we're doing a lot in Maryland. And we wanted to talk about a couple things. We have a Tri-County Transition Council here down on the Lower Shore, which includes Somerset County, Wycomico County, and Worcester County. And then our relationship with Worcester County Developmental Center. And then 2 projects that we're working on right now, research projects, the Way to Work project, and also Project Search, which some of you may be aware of. Okay.
And Matt, before you go to the next slide, we just had a request if you could say what the acronym LEA stands for.
Local Educational Agency. So it's basically each county in the state of Maryland is a LEA.
Thank you. And we'll try to be good about the acronyms and saying what they are. Thank you.
Okay. This slide is all about our Tri-County Transition Council. This started, I don't know, I think we're in our 6th year, and it's called S.W.E.E.T. We all voted on what the acronym was. This acronym stands for School to Work, Education, Employment, and Transition. Again, it's Worcester, Somerset, and Wycomico counties. So this involves all of the different agencies that surround transition. We all want to get together. We meet every quarter. It includes institutions of higher learning, Salisbury University, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and Warwick Community College. Many members of the business community are involved. Obviously, DOORS and DDA, the local people attend. And we've developed a lot of projects out of this group. We created our Tri-County 18 to 21 post-secondary transition program at Warwick Community College. That was developed out of this. And that's a collaboration between DOORS, the local educational agencies, and Warwick Community College. And we discuss a lot about job development, job coaching, and different community linkages. All of the community resource providers are represented there too, and everyone's allowed. We go around the room, and the different agencies or providers can give updates or things that are going on, and there's a lot of collaboration. And the group's been growing a lot over the past few years. And we're also looking at, as anywhere, resources are dwindling. So we look as a tri-county on the lower shore. We have a lot of similarities between the counties, so we look to combine our resources to make sense. Okay, you can go to the next. Oh, and you can keep it on that slide, but also our tri-county group just this past Saturday put on a transition conference. It was our third transition conference. We held it at the community college. We had some guest speakers, and then we had some breakout sessions. One of them was make your way through DDA. And we had sessions for families and for youth. So you could choose which ones to go to. And we had a really good turnout. So that was pretty successful. We had a few students that were speakers to talk about their experiences with their employers after they left school, and how it was important that during school they had all of these work experiences.
And I just wanted to jump in. This is Alexandra. Just the CRP, which is the community resource provider perspective of the SWE-E-T meetings, they're just fantastic. WCDC is just so lucky to be able to hear from the school's perspective, both like from the public schools and from higher education, and also from other CRPs, other community resource providers. It's such a nice space to be able to hear from others, where as if we didn't branch out and create these little cohorts, we wouldn't necessarily get this information as readily available. So these SWE-E-T groups are just fantastic, and WCDC is just so happy to be a part of this.
This next slide is a new research program. It's called Way to Work, and this is all based on all of the research that we know that Christy discussed about the relationship between work experiences in school and successful employment after school. There are, I believe, 5 states that were awarded this grant, and 4 in the state of Maryland, 4 LEAs were selected to join the project. And Worcester was one of them, one of the 4. And there's going to be, next year, there's another 4 joining. So that's going to be 4 years worth of study. And it's for students with disabilities in their second to last year of exiting. So for most, those who are getting diplomas, it would be 11th graders. And if students are staying till 21, it would be the second to last year before they exit. And what we do is, it's a partnership. This is the great part of it too. And you'll see the theme through all of this is all of the partnerships between school and CRPs and different agencies as we try to make the connections. So obviously we have WCPS, which is Worcester County Public Schools. We have 4 different CRPs represented. Worcester County Developmental Center, Abilities Network, St. John's, and Bay Area Center for Independent Living. Mm-hmm. So we've had a growth in the number of CRPs down on the lower shore. It used to not be very many. So again, this is a great way to collaborate between these groups. And DOORS, obviously, is one of the huge players in all of this. It's through them. They actually pay the CRPs for providing job development services. Our business partners, obviously the students and their families, and the University of Maryland. So we started, it's a, I guess you can forward the slide. Yeah. So it's a 2-year research study, so we'll be doing 2 years. And students are, there's 2 groups. So we were able to get 28 students total in our county, which actually is a large percentage of students with IEPs out of the ones that were eligible. And they are randomly assigned into enhanced group, enhanced services, or usual services. And so we obviously have 14 and 14 in the 2 groups. Enhanced services are what the CRPs are providing. And the usual services, students, this was kind of a contention at the beginning among some people that they're not getting the services, but those are the enhanced services. They're not losing any services. They're getting what they would normally get. So some of the things that are the positive parts of this program is early engagement with pre-ETs indoors. So right now we've assigned, students need to get their paperwork in for the pre-ETs student information. So we're finishing that up now. I think we only have 2 students left to complete that part. And then students have to have a minimum of 2 work-based learning experiences, which are 6 to 8 weeks long, and those are supported by the CRP and their staff. And then by the end, by the time you graduate, the expectation is we'd have at least 1 paid work experience, which can be full or part-time, and it's actually paid for by the employer. So obviously the goal is for competitive paid employment after graduation.
And Matt, I just wanted to throw in there, in case people are unfamiliar with pre-ETs, that it stands for Pre-Employment Transition Services through the Division of Rehab Services, for people that may not be familiar with that acronym.
Okay, yes. And so what all of the things, enhanced services, all of the work experiences, you'll develop job skills. Every student has to have a positive personal profile, which looks at what skills they have, what their interests are, what they need to reach their goals. Students have to have a resume afterwards with references. And also, all of these students are going to be, as Christy had talked about, are going to have a Maryland digital portfolio that we'll be using probably in their 2nd year. And all of the students will complete and make entries into that. So that's a good way to, we're very excited to be able to use this tool. Anything else on way to work?
I think the only thing 2 things I would add to way to work from the provider's perspective is, and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but myself and our other job coach will help if you're wondering like where the adult agency provider comes in here. Like we'll help with the resume and the cover letter and references, and follow along services and things of that nature. And I just Matt and I had a conversation yesterday with Way to Work, and I remember in all of our early meetings the reservation about enhanced services versus usual services. And I had said to Matt the other day, there is no difference in the usual services. It's what they would normally get. But this research project is so exciting because the enhanced services group can really change the course for future students to come after the 2 years of this study. So that's just extremely exciting to be a part of. And the school system has been so great getting us our positive personal profiles on all of the students, and just really doing everything they can to contact us with the students, put us in contact with the students. That's been really helpful.
And
Yeah.
Alexandra, would you mind, just because you are representing a provider organization, can you describe a little bit what that work looked like on your end? What were the services you were providing students that you got hooked up with earlier?
Yeah, so it's very we're in the very preliminary stages of way to work. We definitely, we're definitely getting the ball rolling here. Hopefully this answers your question. So far we were given the positive personal profile, which is a document. I believe University of Maryland made that, or did the schools already have that?
I think it was the one that there's a couple versions. The one we're using was by George Tilson.
Yeah, so we had the positive personal profile, and the case manager sat down with the students and they made that. And then we had our MEOT meeting, which is Maryland Interagency Team. We love our acronyms. And it had contact information for the students. So what we did, what WCDC did as an agency was we contacted parents first. Even though we are working with young adults who, most are 17 or even 18, we just contacted their parents and, explained who we are. And we're in the process of setting up face-to-face meetings with the students who are in the enhanced service group.
That's terrific.
If that answers
Thank
your
you.
question.
It does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And some agencies have already made face-to-face meetings. St. John Community Services, I want to give them a little shout out because I just thought this was so sweet. At our last MEOT meeting, they had started meeting with students, and one of the students is really interested in culinary arts, and the employment training specialist from St. John's challenged the student to a bake-off. So they're having a bake-off right now. So that's just one of the things.
Oh,
that
they're
we're
right
doing.
down the street. I should try to see if I could go down there.
Yeah, maybe they'll give you some samples. That's
awesome.
Just like a fun example. We do a lot of cut and dry stuff, resumes, cover letters, and references, and that was just a really fun real life example, really highlighting the students' wants and desires, and that was just really cool to hear St. John's doing that. So that's just one example.
And so it would be safe to say that an ideal outcome of your work with the students is that you're going to be able to build that relationship and be able to, again, thinking about the trajectory, help students make more of that seamless transition right into the world of work that you might not
absolutely.
be able to do if you didn't make those early connections. So I'll be anxious to hear a year from now how that looks for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We are too.
We're all anxious. Great, thanks.
I think we can go to the next one.
You can go to the next one. Okay.
And I just want to quick pause for a second. For those of you who don't know about Worcester County Developmental Center, which I will constantly refer to as WCDC, I just wanted to take a quick second and read a little blurb about our agency, and then kind of explain what I do. So Worcester County Developmental Center is a nonprofit organization located in Newark, Maryland, and we provide services to adults with disabilities. We do an individual directed approach, and each person, with the assistance of their team, is the architect of the support system outlined in their individual plan. We have a whole host of programs and services that we provide in our facility as well as the community. We have day habilitation, supported employment, which is the department that I'm under, and we have janitorial services, greenhouse lawn care, food service, laundry, and the list just goes on. Some of our just phenomenal services that I love to talk about other than supported employment, we have residential services, so we provide living situations, long-term living situations, as well as emergency-based living situations for our individuals. And we have personal supports. So we have personal supports facilitators that go out into the community. They serve as mentors. And we do enrichment activities. Our day program has come leaps and bounds with all of the changes and regulations that are coming down, and we are out in the community now more than ever, volunteering and working. And that's where I come in as a job coach and provide, I always like to say I help obtain and maintain employment for our individuals. And I also work with individuals who do not attend a day program that are just completely community bound. So that's a little bit about WCDC for those of you who didn't know. And where Project Search comes in, if you did want to reference the slides now, we were the service community resource provider chosen to implement Project Search. And we are just so grateful and so thankful for Matt and for everybody that made this happen. We're extremely excited. Project Search originated from Cincinnati Children's Hospital. There are 4 counties in Maryland currently operating a PS program, and by PS we just mean Project Search program. It targets students in their final year of school, and it's to immerse students in a real-world setting job. So what's really fascinating about Project Search from a provider's perspective, I think even for the schools, I think this is exciting too, is they are not in school at all for that day. They are completely at our host hospital, which is Atlantic General Hospital, also known as AGH. So they spend all day at AGH. The day is split between 3 job rotations, and we have WCDC in parentheses right there because that's where the adult service provider comes into play. So for those 3 job rotations, myself and our other job coach will go in and coach the students one-on-one. We'll be there to provide those hands-on supports. And then there's classroom instruction and WCPS, which is Worcester County Public Schools. That's where Matt will come in and they'll provide classroom instruction. And just there's so many other learning opportunities. Project Search is still in its early stages. We just literally got our, our licensing agreement in the mail the other day, and we're signing off on everything. But that is a little overview of the Project Search. If you want to go to the next slide, Stacy. Again, I just want to echo what Matt said. One of the themes that we're really trying to highlight here is the collaboration. And Matt and we're really collaborating. We're squeezed behind this little desk here, and we wanted to present this panel together just to really show that unity that adult agencies are really standing with the local school systems. So this right here, if you look to your slide, this highlights all of the partners. Now, obviously, there's so many partners in play here, but these are the heavy hitters that we wanted to highlight. So the center circle, where it says employment opportunities after school, that's the goal of Project Search, is employment opportunities after school. And that's where the whole immersion into the host hospital really comes into play. That's why we immerse the students there for so many hours a day. We have WCPS, the schools. We have WCDC, which is us, the adult agency provider. We have DOORS, which again is Division of Rehabilitation Services. We have DDA, Developmental Disabilities Administration, our students and our families, which are the key players, very key players, and Atlantic General Hospital, which is our host hospital. And that is a little bit about Project Search. I was noticing, Stacy, I don't know if maybe this was our fault, but Matt and I had some slides. If you go to the next one, you can go to the next slide. So we'll obviously take questions. But
I apologize.
No, it's okay. No, we can always send this. We had a lot of PowerPoint trouble the other day, but we can always, I can email you the links that we had up there. But it's really simple. Like if you just pull up Google, and it's as easy as, if you just Google Project Search, Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Same thing with Way to Work. You can look up Way to Work Maryland, or if you wanted to look up like some of the other states that are doing Way to Work, it's like California. You can look up those to see what they're implementing. But it's just as easy as Googling. Project Search has some fantastic videos that really outlines exactly what the relationship is, how Cincinnati's got it off the ground. So definitely look into, we'll look into getting those links to you so that all of our attendees can do that research as well.
Yeah, we'll add all of those, and there were a couple resource items that Christy mentioned. We'll add all of those into the PowerPoint, and then we'll just resend the updated PowerPoint to all of the participants today, so everybody will have them.
Awesome.
Just want to open up if anybody has any questions for any of our panelists, and thank you, Alexandra and Matt, for that overview. It sounds like the partnership that you and the rest of your team members are working on is going to be very beneficial to all of those students. I don't see any questions coming through. We're just going to give it another second because usually there's one or two last. Feel free to keep typing them in there, and I'm going to just, I have a couple last minute things that I want to talk about before we end for the day. I like to just kind of bring things back around because there was well, first of all, we had a lot of acronyms, which it's crazy, isn't it? How many acronyms we have in our field. If somebody that was not related to this field listened to this webinar, their head would be spinning with, but a couple of the themes that emerge for me, listening to Christy and listening to Matt and Alexandra, and also just thinking about my own experience with transition, is a couple of themes. Talk about it often, talk about it early, and don't think of it as just a moment in time and that it's just going to be inevitable, but there are interventions and things that we can all do to make it a positive thing. I definitely, having high expectations is so incredibly important, and especially as we think about transitioning out of a school system and then thinking about our adult service provider system and how those things are evolving and changing, and we are having higher expectations of people that really are focused on competitive integrated employment and full community membership. So if we can help people envision that as early in their lives as possible, then this trajectory is that much smoother. Definitely a theme that I heard from all three of our presenters is collaboration. So nobody's working alone, everybody's working with multiple partners. And I also would like to acknowledge around that there are a lot of partners out there, a lot of state agency partners and community partners, just typical community members and employers and all of those people that that we didn't necessarily highlight today, but that are absolutely part of this as well. And we, as we continue to work on our state agency partnerships, we will have more opportunities to do some joint, as Christy said, joint branding and joint messaging and those kind of things, joint trainings. So look for more of that to come in the future. If you haven't been part of a local transition council, or if your area doesn't have one, start one or join one, because as you heard from all of our presenters, those collaboratives, those councils, those teams and those partnerships are where all of these wonderful outcomes emerge, whether it's a project that's time limited or it's a long-term collaboration, whether it's partnerships with other people in the community that come together and have conversations about what can we do together. I can't express enough. Those are just wonderful ways at the local level to make things happen. So I strongly recommend getting hooked up with a group or creating one. If there isn't one, then just start the conversation. And absolutely, as we think about employment first, everybody here was focused on employment and the path to employment. And as Christy stated, the incredible importance of work-based experience as an indicator for post-school outcomes of employment. So the more that we can all collaborate to make those happen on the front end, the better it is for the transition. So I'm sure that there are more, but those are the themes that come to mind for me. While I have a captive audience here, I just want to note that we do have a webinar series coming up in the month of April, June, and July. And the reason I'm bringing it up or keep bringing it up early is because there's going to be a time change. So I know a lot of people have a webinar just built into their calendar. It's going to be the same day. It's going to be the third Friday of each of those months, but it's going to be from 1 to 3. And this series is going to be presented by one of our ODEP subject matter experts, Sarah Murphy from San Francisco, and she's going to be talking about community-based day. And we're really going to focus down on what does it look like to provide quality community services, and particularly the role of a direct support professional. So we want to have a lot of participation in these webinars, get as many people as you can that might be interested, whether it doesn't matter your role, the more the merrier. So just wanted to make everybody aware of the 1 to 3 time change. And there is a webinar in May that's going to be the typical time. So I just wanted everybody to have that on their calendar. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Oh wait, we do have a question. Hold on, let me take a look here. See if I can read it. It said, and I'm not entirely sure which program this person's referencing, but it says, does this program accommodate students with behavioral issues? I'm guessing maybe that was referencing Project Search. Do you guys have thoughts on being able to accommodate a wide variety of students in those programs?
Now, between the two, Way to Work is randomly assigned. So I know in our situation, we would have we do have a couple of students, but we're going to provide the services and see where we go. And then our others, we have for Project Search, we can only select 8 students for this project.
Thanks, Matt.
Stacey, sorry, if I can too, I think when it comes to behavioral, questions with students, I think it would just be a matter of, reaching out for technical assistance, like if there was any support we needed, like training on how to, handle situations like that. We've been offered for both projects, for Way to Work and Project Search, we've been offered so much technical assistance, trainings, and as an adult agency provider, we do handle behavioral issues, and I think it would just be a matter of, if for whoever asked this question, like if if you're looking at implementing a research study like Way to Work or Project Search, and you have individuals with behaviors, it would just be a matter of open communication with schools and adult agency providers, and just reaching out for that technical assistance, just to see if that was a need, if that helps at all.
That's helpful, thank you. And just another huge thank you to all 3 of you. I appreciate your time, I appreciate your knowledge and experience in helping us. And I know this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to these issues, but I think it was provided a really nice broad perspective of what transition is and different ways we can think about it. So definitely more to come. Thank you everybody for participating. Thank you for everybody that listened in. We're going to end the webinar. So everybody have a wonderful weekend.